Welcome back to another video, and this is my end of the year eyeshadow palette ranking for 2024. Welcome back, and this is my end of the year eyeshadow palette ranking from all the palettes that I have tried during this year. And these are palettes that I tried during this year, so there could be actually palettes that have been launched earlier than during 2024, but I didn't get to try those out before this year, or I just got them during this year, so that's just something to consider if you're seeing some older palettes. And another thing you should be aware of, if a palette has been decluttered from my collection, then it's not included in this video. So if, for example, there were some palettes you saw on my mid-year ranking, it could be that it's no longer actually in this particular video, because I already did my end of the year declutter video, and I have actually also filmed my last collective eyeshadow palette review video for this year. But yeah, altogether there are 30 palettes, so 30 palettes sort of survived from the 2 declutters I have done during this year, or some palettes I have actually decluttered already after reviewing them because I thought that the quality just wasn't something, or the palette's color story was something that I didn't want to keep in my collection. So you should be aware of that even though some of these palettes have ranked lower, there is still something that made the palette is still for some reason in my collection, so it means that I do like it, but these are of course very subjective preferences. And I do have to say, like, from this ranking in general, I had a very clear vision that which palette was going to be the last and which was going to be first, but I do have to say that if I would do this maybe on some other day, the places, for example, the palettes from in between those could like change. So this is all good and fun, and if you for some reason think that one palette that ranked low was your favorite palette, that's a good thing. Also, if one palette that was my favorite wouldn't work out for you, that's just how makeup usually goes, and it's good that we have so much to choose from. But let's get to the ranking, because there is still like 30 palettes to go through, so we will be here for a while. Okay, so let's get to it. So first one is in the place 30, and I have to be a bit careful with this one because I actually went and effing dropped this. So this is the Kiko Milano. I'm gonna put the listing from all of these palettes to the description box, because this, again, Kiko for example doesn't put the palette names to their palettes, and the palette number has faded away from this one. But this is basically, and I have to be very careful because it's kind of maybe showing. So this is a very basic bronzy neutral palette. I do like keeping this around, for example, for summer season, and this is a very easy formula to work with. But I do think why this ranked last is that it's a pretty, like, in terms of color story and what you're able to do with this one, it's just very something forgettable considering what other palettes I have. But as I said, this does serve a purpose in my collection, but because it's nothing like extraordinary, that's why it's ranking last. Then a palette that maybe suffers from a bit similar issue than the Kiko one, and then this also has maybe a bit formulas that I'm not so happy with. So this is the Raw Mad Cosmetics. So this was it Temp Palette 01 Pampas Garden was the name of this one. And I was pretty positively surprised with the formula of this one, especially the matte formula. I was kind of thinking what I've seen from K-Beauty, that it's gonna be very like sheer matte formula with maybe shimmers, like sheer shimmers that are maybe like a wash-off shimmer rather than opaque shimmers. But actually the matte formula in this one, it was very good. It was buildable, but it blended out nicely. The shimmers in this one are also like pretty nice, but unfortunately I'm not a fan of these like glittery shimmers that have the adhesive. So K-Beauty, and I do believe also C-Beauty products, have a lot of these kind of formulas. You have to be pretty careful when you remove those from your eyes, so because of the shimmer formulas. And again, even though the formula of this was pretty impressive in terms of the mattes, it's still pretty average, like a peach color story. Also, there isn't a super lot of variety with this one, so that is why this is also ranking quite in the bottom. Then on 28th place, this was a purely something related to color preferences. So this is the P. Louise If Looks Could Chill. This is a humongous palette. I think I'm only gonna show the top layer. So if you know P. Louise palettes, these have 2 layers. Basically, there's the box over here, and then when you open this one, you can see this top layer. So this is purely ranking in the lower bottom of this ranking altogether, because I'm not a fan of blue eyeshadows. And but I did like this formula. I was quite actually positively surprised with this one, because I didn't have huge expectations, because I know blues are hard to formulate. And I do have like all the blues that I need in this one. Also the shimmers were very nice. They aren't like any like multi-chrome kind of shimmers in this one, but they are nice, good basic shimmers. But purely because the color story, because it's basically just what, 2 tiers of blue. Actually, let's do that. I will also like quickly show. So the bottom drawer has kind of more teal shades, but yeah, so this has a place of being the ultimate blue palette in my collection, but because unfortunately this is just not a color story I prefer, that is why it's also ranking lower. And then on place 27 we have the Denessa Myricks Groundworks 2 Blooming Romance palette, and I discussed this quite already, I think, when I did my declutter video for this end of the year, that I do like using this more for the cheeks rather than for eyes. This still is something that is categorized in my eyeshadow palette drawer rather than to my cheek products. And with this one I had the issue that it's a very one-tone palette. I actually did like working with the creams, and I was positively surprised as someone who has an oily leaning skin type that the creams didn't actually cause any creasing, and the mattes that are in the smaller pans in this one, they did layer over quite well. But my issue was with this one that basically this light shade and these 2 deep shades over here, these are like the only shades you can get somehow dead with this one. All the mid-tone shades with this one kind of mixed in together. So the eye looks that I got with this one, there wasn't like a super lot of variety with them. So because of the lack of variety, this is also why it's ranking at the bottom, and also because I do still prefer this maybe more as a base rather than an eye palette. So the palette that's ranked 26th, so it's this one. So this is the Glamlite and Chucky palette, so I believe this was the Crazy in Love palette. This why again it's ranking relatively low is for the color story. I do actually think the formula of this one is pretty good, however there's a Glamlite palette that is ranking quite high because I do think they improved the formula even more, but I do think the formula of this was really good, especially considering that Glamlite for indie brand is one of the more inexpensive brands. But this color story is pretty deep, this sort of very grungy color story. There are like few certain occasions that I do like to pull this palette out for, but comparing this to all the other palettes, this truly, again, is one of those color stories that it's not my just #1 favorite, and that's the reason why it's ranking where it is. Then on place 25, yeah, 25, so on place 25 I ranked the Dior Quint, so this was their holiday quint from this year, and this was these are so super reflective. 643 Golden Masquerade, so this was the sort of burgundy leaning one. I'm actually going to show this up maybe a bit closer because it's so small. So I do think that if you're looking for this sort of high-end quad or quint quality, this is a good option, but I do feel that because this was so expensive and this has like one of the shades, this sort of peachy light shade over here was a dud, that is why it's ranking relatively low, because if I'm paying like over 60 or 70 euros for a quint, I expect every shade to work effortlessly. I did like the rest of the shades, and I did like kind of like the romantic burgundy look that you're able to get with this one, but because one of the like lighter shades in this one is dud, it's also kind of limiting how many looks you can do with this one. So that is the reason mainly why this is ranking so low. But I do think compared to because I wasn't a fan of the holiday quint last year, I actually ended up decluttering. I do think in terms of formula this was better than the quint I tried last year. Then on place 24 we have the Moira A Moment With You palette. So Moira became available in our retailers during this year, and I wanted to of course try because I do know that for example US YouTubers have been talking quite a lot of good things about the brand. So this is how the palette is looking like. I do think that if you are especially shopping on a budget, Moira's eyeshadow, like the formula quality I have no complaints about. There are like few, maybe too many topper shades in this one compared to like how many shades the palette altogether has, but I do sort of like the opaque shimmer formulas that are in here. They're very like easy to work with, they are very opaque and creamy. The matte shades also are very good quality, however with this one, why it's also being on the bottom part of my ranking is that unfortunately with the mattes you don't get a lot of diversity with this one, because it is basically, there's like a lot of brown mattes and then you have this one sort of burgundy shade over here. So the only way you're able to kind of switch up your look if you're using one of the more like colorful shimmers in this one. So it's I'd say that because of the formula I did want to like sort of rank this like maybe like up from some of the other palettes you just saw, but because I do still think that there could have been made a couple of improvements with this palette altogether, that is why it's still like on the bottom half. Then on place 23. So we have the NARS, and this was the Afterglow Irresistible palette. So this actually is the first NARS palette I have ever tried. I do think the formula of this is very beautiful, so especially if you like your more buildable, like high-end matte formula that is more buildable, but you can build it into full opaqueness, this is a good like purchase. Also the shimmer shades in this one are very sparkly. The shimmers, however, are a bit on the drier side, so that's just something to consider if you're thinking buying this particular palette. For why this still isn't ranking like any higher than it is purely because because it is this sort of bronzy pinkish, like this is like, I like to call this the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk extend. This is basically what I like to refer to this one, even though it's an NARS palette obviously. But you are kind of limited with the looks. Like you're gonna get some kind of variation of a bronzy pinkish look with this one, bit with a gold, so there isn't like a super lot of like variety you're gonna get with this one, but this is still like, if this kind of color story appeals to you and you like some sparkly shimmers, I do think this is a better value than maybe some other high-end palettes that are on the market, but as I said, because of the limitations with the variety, this is ranking where it is. And then with the place 22, we're having the Gourmand Girls what was this? Peach Perfect palette. So unfortunately for me, this was a bit of a disappointing palette. I'm gonna see if I can bend this, bend this out. So in terms of color story, when I saw that this was launched and I knew this was something that I was gonna order for, especially for the fall season, I was quite excited because I was thinking this sagey greens combined with some neutrals and peaches, I was thinking that that's absolutely gonna be perfect for fall. And I do think, except for one shimmer shade, which is this particular shade over here, this is absolutely awful, but all the rest of the shimmers very beautiful, very dimensional. But the matte shades, unfortunately, were disappointing. So Gourmand Girl clearly changed their formula, because previously from this one I had tried the Serio Soto collaboration palette, and why I was so excited to get this one, because I remember the mattes also being very like opaque but buttery and nice to work with. I felt that with this one, the mattes you really like, they aren't unusable, but I have better indie mattes in my collection and in the palettes that I tried during this year. You do have to build some of the like lighter mattes, and so the mid-tone and then some of the deeper mattes, those work okay, but I just feel that compared to the mattes I have tried earlier, I do think this might be a bit harder pressed, so that could influence why this isn't maybe as sort of opaque initially when you put the shadows on, the first layer of shadows on your lid, but yeah. So because of the matte quality compared to what I had tried from Gourmand Girls before, that is why it is not sort of making it to the top part of my ranking. So I think from palettes here on forward, they were all quite good in terms of formulas. So I think with this one, with some there's going to be like some formula things that I'm going to be talking about, but from here on forward, I do think it was a bit maybe harder to arrange these, because there could be like, if I would do this in another day, some of these might be placed in another way. But anyway, so on place 21 we have the P. Louise on the Pool. So this was one of their smaller holiday palettes, and I do think, like I discussed this already in the sort of collective review I did for the P. Louise holiday stuff from this year, that I do think that especially what I like to see is that when brands improve their formula. I truly think that this shimmers, that this one and the other holiday palette that I'm going to be showing from the brand, I think after this one, I do think the shimmer formula has been improved. It has like more sparkle. There was even kind of this one, which is a bit more like duochrome shade over here, and that's something that I like to see. However, why this is still where it is, that it is at the end of the day pretty basic neutral brown palette, and also there are like these two brown matte shades that are included in this one. These kind of look similar on the eyes, so I do like the idea of doing this kind of smaller like eyeshadow palette, because I have a huge eyeshadow palette collection anyway, so I don't need like a lot of these super big palettes. But if you do a small palette, then I would wish that generally then all the shades would be like different enough from one another, so that even with the less shades you do kind of get diversity. But in terms of formula, I do think this one is better formula P. Louise has done. And then on the place 20 we have the Sweet Escape. So this is the huge palette, and I'm only gonna be discussing the eyeshadow formula because this is one of those palettes that also has like a layer of face shades, and let's see how we're gonna do this because this was one of the like... Are we on? I hope we're on frame. So this is a ranking above the sort of previous palette because obviously this is like has already more diversity to it. So this is like this sort of candy cane themed color story where you have some pinks and browns in it. I'm ranking this here where it is. I do again think that the formulas in this one, as I said, there's been improvement compared to the previous other P-Louise palettes that I've tried. The shimmers are very beautiful. Mattes are also very nice to work, very nice and easy to work with, even with the deeper shades. Again, I do think there are like maybe a couple of shades within this one that are kind of similar with one another, so there could have been maybe some like some other choices could have been made. But I do think that, for example, the looks I got with this one, there was like I think I was able to genuinely get like different looks when I used it, and I wasn't feeling that I'm just getting the same look all over, like over and over again. The reason, however, why I'm still ranking this like relatively low is that it is very bulky, but again, there, as I said, there are like face shades in this one, so, and I was like knew that when I bought this one. So I do think for an all-over like palette, this is a good palette, but if I'm purely like basing like this based on my eyeshadow preferences, this is where it kind of falls into. And also, I do have this sort of pinkish, peachy and brown shades. I have those in my collection quite many times, so it's still not like anything super unique compared to other palettes that I have. Then what are we having next? So on place 19 we're actually gonna have the first Dior Backstage palette from this year. So I'm ranking the Warm Essential in the 19th place, and again I'm gonna be showing this a bit closer because it's a bit smaller. So the reason why this is ranking, and I would have liked to rank this higher, but I had to think about this also from the point onward that how versatile the palette is, and this had the same good formula than the Silver Essentials palette had last year. So it had these opaque, very creamy, nice shimmers that were very effortless to work with, but still packed a punch in them. However, unfortunately, you don't get like that. Sorry. You don't get that lot of diversity with this one, and in the end of the day I also have to think that there are like warm toned, again, brown palettes that I have tried during the years. The looks aren't like that unique when I compare to maybe other warm tone linen brown orange looks that I have done like as long as I've been wearing makeup. So unfortunately this is ranking lower purely because of the color story, like how basic the color story is. But in terms of quality, I do think that this was the like best Backstage palette that I tried, and I actually did try all the Backstage palettes that were launched during this year. So in terms of quality, impeccable, but unfortunately because of the color story I did have to rank this where it is. Then on place 18 there was a new to me indie brand that I tried during this year. So this was the Bougie Boudoir by Kaima Cosmetics, and I did try one other palette from this brand earlier this year. However, the formulas in that one I wasn't a fan of them. I actually ended up decluttering that one. But with this one I was actually more happier with the formula. So this is this sort of cool toned, neutral leaning, pinkish leaning palette. I do think that, as I said, I again give credit to brands when they improved their formula. I especially wasn't a fan of all the shimmer formulas that were in the Skulls and Roses palette. That's why it ended up getting decluttered. This is already like much better. All the shimmers in this one, there isn't any like strange sticky or like very this sort of chunky shimmers. They are very nice smooth shimmers. Why this is ranking low is purely because there is another palette that I can get similar looks with, but that has much better formula, and it's going to be ranking pretty high in this particular video. And also the fact that the mattes, they still need to work on those. These are pretty dry mattes. They are usable mattes. You can get nice looks with them, and they are like workable within the color, like shimmers with this one, but they aren't the best like indie mattes or mattes in general that I have tried. So that is why it's still not making it to maybe the top of the top from all the palettes that I tried during this year. Let's see, we were on the 18 and now let's go to the 17. So on place 17 we're doing Unearthly Cosmetics, my was this My Dream or Dreamer palette? Dreamer, yeah. So this was a cool tone palette that I do think this might have been actually their holiday release from 2023, but Monolith Shop didn't get these until January, so I bought it during this year and obviously tried doing this year. I do think that Unearthly clearly has improved their formulas. I tried some of their older palettes when the brand became available in Monolith Shop and I was very disappointed in those, but these newer palettes clearly have better formula. However, compared to another Unearthly palette that's going to be ranking higher, I did have some issues with this one. I felt that some of these like colorful mattes, the sort of blues and purples that are in this one, those were harder to work with. And the shimmers in this one were very pretty and nice, but some of them were like the kind of shimmers that I did feel that I had to build them more to get them looking more like opaque on my lid. So this was maybe also a bit in terms of like preferences. If you like your more like buildable, like more turbo-like shimmers, then this could be good. But as I said, there's another palette from this brand that's going to be ranking higher because there was a lot more improvement, I think, even compared to this palette. What I will give this credit for, this is a very smart color story. I was very positively surprised when this was in my rotation, like that all of these shades, even though it has like pinks and blues and different kind of colors, they all actually mix in. I do think this is a very smart color story, but there's also some like neutrals options in this one. So this is just ranking here also because the brand has actually even improved more and there is like better indie palettes, but I still do think that if you're looking for a cool tone palette from indie brands and you're able to get this one, I do believe this might have been limited edition, but if you can get this from somewhere, this is still a good palette to buy from. Next one, so we are on 16. So this is the palette that I'm actually wearing because I actually filmed the collective eyeshadow palette review video for this and a few other palettes that were in that particular video. So on place 16 we're doing Oden's Eye Rose Jingle palette. So this is the one of the two holiday palettes the brand came out this year and this is how it's looking like. I have to rank this here purely again because of the sort of diversity factor. So this was, I'm actually in the minority thinking that I actually like the color story of this one more because it has pinks and it has some sort of lilacs in it, so it has like these pastel tones that I do like. However, unfortunately, if you have especially a medium to deeper skin tone, you're not gonna find a lot of deepening up shades in this one, especially since one of the few like actually deep shades here, this is a dark shade. This was very hard to get to work with fingers or brushes or with anything. So, because I have to consider that is this a cohesive palette all over, for those of you who just not like a nice sort of like matte as a base and nice shimmer on top of it, then this could be a good palette, but if you are someone who prefers having like mid-tone shades, deepening up shades and sort of lighter shades to bring depth and diversity to your looks, then this isn't going to be a palette for you, and that's the reason why I still have to like rank this lower, even though I do prefer the color story of this one. So on place number 15 we're going to be ranking the other Dior Backstage palette that did survive sort of my declutter. So this is the Celestial Purple palette and this was in their like holiday collection this year. So again, I'm showing this a bit closer because it is one of the more... So I did ended up ranking this. I was very much debating how I'm gonna rank this against the sort of Warm Essentials one, because with the Warm Essentials I actually did prefer the formula of that one to this one. However, in the end of the day, even though I wasn't such a big fan of this one, because this especially had a lot of like these toppery shimmer shades, and when you're having a 9 pan, like I could have taken one, but because most of the shimmer shades are like toppers, that kind of deducted some points with this particular palette. However, I did end up ranking this higher is that this was surprisingly versatile palette. Like you can get a blue, you can get a neutral, you can get a purple look, and you can get a mix of those looks, and actually all these, even though this has cool and warm tone shades, they actually still mix in together quite well. So I did rank this higher because for a 9 pan I actually found out that this was a surprisingly versatile palette, and even despite having the toppers I was actually able to make all the shades work, but I would have still wished that they would have like stuck to the more opaque satin shimmer formula that they do and maybe include like one shimmery topper instead of like having many of those. But because this does have the diversity that I do like to emphasize with palette in terms of having like different kind of tones and different kind of colors, that is why this ranked over the Warm Essentials, even though I do think the formula in this one isn't as good as in that one. So on next two places we're gonna have two smaller palettes, and I'll have to check that all my numbers right. Yeah. So on place number 14 I placed the YSL Holiday Quad from this year. So this is the Golden Lace palette, and again I'm gonna show this a bit closer so you can kind of get better. So I do think in terms of like high-end formulas, this is a very excellent palette. There's a bit variety in texture. You have more satin shades, there's a shimmer topper, and then you do have a one true like brown shade over here. However, at the end of the day, this is still a quad, and because the shades within this quad, like they are like gold and then you basically have brown, you don't have a lot of things you can do with this one. But I do think in terms of like the high-end like palette releases from this year, I do think in terms of the formula, this is still a very good, and just the way this was like executed in the color story, I do think this was a very, very good release, but because you can't do a lot with this one, that is why it's still ranking where it does. Then something that I rank higher because even though this is a smaller palette, this actually is like, it's less expensive, but I am much more maybe impressed with the formulas in this one. So on place we are on 13. So this is the MUA Desert Bloom palette. So this is one of the 5 pans. And why this is ranking like almost to the top 10 was that I think that if you're looking for something very inexpensive that still has beautiful formulas, the mattes in this one are very easy to build, but they have pigment to them. The shimmers are these nice smooth buttery shimmers that have a lot of impact to them. Like, I think considering how cheap these palettes are, this is an excellent purchase, especially if you're someone who just likes doing your everyday makeup, maybe on the go in your car or maybe on public transport. So that is why I'm ranking this very highly. It is still in the end of the day a sort of peach neutral palette, but I do think, like, considering what you're getting for the price, this is excellent. So next one on 12, before we're getting to top 10, we're gonna go through the 12 and 11. These two palettes I did have to do quite, I was like had a quite clear vision how I'm gonna place these, but I in the end had to again go with the preference thing, like what I still preferred over another. So on place 12 I'm gonna be putting the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. So I got during this year, but this was launched during last year, and this is how the palette is looking like. I do think the shimmers, particularly in this one, are very beautiful, and in terms of skin undertones, this is a pretty like perfect match for me because I'm someone who has a cool rosy undertone, so these are shades that should like flatter me in terms of undertone. However, what like dropped this over the second palette I'm gonna be showing after this one was that I did feel that I was a bit limited with the mattes. I feel that the mattes in this one were kind of starting to get the feeling that I was creating the same look over and over again, mainly because I didn't have like that many like different matte options to branch into. But in terms of the shimmers, very beautiful, very like, this was the first like Natasha Denona palette in her new formula that I tried, and I was very impressed, especially with the shimmers of this one. Then the palette that I did rank higher from the Natasha Denona palette, so this is in place 11, and this is the I Need a Warm palette, so this is basically the warm tone version. In terms of why I still like preferred this one, this had the matte like variety I was looking for. I do kind of also think that the one multi-chrome shade, which is the shade over here, it does bring something fun to the palette. The shimmer shades and shimmer quality was the same good quality that was in the I Need a Nude palette, but I just think that even though in terms of like undertone preference, this sort of very warm tone palette isn't maybe something that suits me as well as the I Need a Nude, but at the end of the day I do still think that I maybe just got a bit more with this one compared to the I Need a Nude. Then we're going to the top 10, so we are getting to the exciting part. So in the 10th place I actually did end up ranking the Silvery Bliss palette from Oden's and this was the second holiday palette. Even though I do have to say I actually preferred the colors in the Rosy Jingle palette, I do still think that when I at the end of the day consider that which palette gave more diversity in terms of depth and what kind of colors were generally included, because with this one you can kinda go to the more neutral way, or if you want to go on full on red Christmas with maybe some gold, you can actually do that with this one. So this is purely ranking quite high because I do think as an overall cohesive palette this is a bit better compared to Rosy Jingles palette and some of the like generally just like some of the other palettes that I just showed. And I do think like that if this is the kind of color story that you're eyeing for Christmas, I would like recommend getting this one. Then on 9th, this is now the sort of Unearthly palette I was referring to. I was like, this is the high temp palette and I was pretty like blown away with this one. So this, like, especially for this summer, this got so many things right. I'm not usually a fan of majority matte palettes, but with this one, because of what kind of mattes were included in this one, that's what got me excited. And also like the shimmer formula in this one, when I said that with the Dreamer palette, I had the feeling that some of them you had to build, they were a bit more like topper leaning. These were like truly opaque shimmers that if you swiped one of these on the lid, it actually completely changed your look. Two of the shimmers in this one are multichrome, so this shade over here, and I think it's the orangey shade over here. So it has two multichromes, then you have two opaque like traditional shimmers, and this was just like very fun to work with. I actually end up doing a couple of all matte looks with this one. I usually don't do all matte looks because I do like my shimmers. And as I said with the Dreamer palette, the formulas were already good, but with some of the muted colorful shades, they were a bit like, they weren't as good. But with this one, they truly also got the colorful matte formula right. And some of these formulas in terms of mattes are mattes that are like colors that are harder to formulate, but they like nailed everything with this one. And I will always, when a palette can surprise me in such a positive manner, that's already gonna like raise it higher above some like other palette, compared to some other palettes that I tried. So that is why this is ranking like within the top 10. So if if Unearthly keeps up the good work that they've done with this formula, I'm probably gonna be buying more palettes from them. Unfortunately, all the palettes that they launched during the fall time, those were like big palettes, so I hope that maybe next year we're gonna see these smaller ones, because I actually like buying these more rather than the very big ones. So then on 8th place we had a palette that I had very much high expectations for, but it quite didn't meet them, and actually I was a bit surprised when because I tried like we're gonna be discussing Blend Bunny next, and I tried 2 Blend Bunny palettes this year, and this I expected to actually rank higher, but oh, here we are. So this is the Longing palette, so this was their sort of cool toned palette that they did during the fall time, and I do have to say like this again does what Blend Bunny does well. It has mattes that are easy to work with, but still have pigment to them. The shimmers in this one are actually improved a lot from the shimmers that I tried from Blend Bunny before, because with this one there was I think 1 or 2, or there was like 1 multichrome in here, but all the shimmers, they had more sparkle to them, they had more like oomph to them compared to shimmers I've tried from them. And this could have been like ranking a lot higher, but what I noticed when I was wearing this is that this runs pretty deep. And if you are someone who has a deeper skin tone than I do, that could be a good thing. But I had the issue that even some of the mid-tone looking shades actually ended up looking pretty deep on my eyes. So with this one I had like bit of the gripe that if I tried to do something a bit more toned down, but I always ended up getting kind of a very smoky look, which is like, it's a nice thing if you like that kind of look, but I would have wished to also have the option to do something lighter. And so this is basically for me missing the mid-tone shades. It has like the lighter shades that are in this one, those are like, those do actually translate light on your lids, but then the rest of the shades they do get pretty deep pretty quickly, so that's just like a preference thing. But overall I do still like this color story. I'm pretty happy that Blend Bunny did a more this sort of neutral palette that has colors in it, and this is also very refreshing when you compare to the multitude of rainbow palettes that Blend Bunny was releasing, especially at the end of this year. This was actually like the only palette that I bought, because the second palette I'm gonna be talking about that I got as a gift. But this was truly like the only palette that like stood out for me from all the palettes this year, because they were kind of stuck in the rut of releasing a lot of rainbow palettes, especially during the fall time. On the place number 7 we I think have the highest ranking drugstore palette, and this I think truly deserves being the like favorite drugstore palette from year, and I've talked about this a lot. So this is the Makeup Revolution True Icon palette. I tried all together 3 palettes from this brand this year. 2 of them had a bit of like some issues, and actually none of them got to stay, but this truly I do think deserves to stay in my collection. Like, if you're looking for this kind of color story at a drugstore price, I do think like, especially again, I'm rewarding Makeup Revolution for the fact that they finally got their eyeshadow formula together, because Makeup Revolution was notorious, and I can I can agree with this because I tried a multitude of Makeup Revolution eyeshadow palettes before, because especially as a student, it used to be something that I could easily order from online and it didn't cost much, but it wasn't the best eyeshadow palette, like eyeshadow quality in the market. And especially I think that with so much like good indie brands coming, it was like Makeup Revolution was improving a lot of their products, but the eyeshadows just seemed to be stick in some kind of very bad formula. But now they have fixed this. And the shimmers in this one are beautiful, the mattes in this one are beautiful. You don't get a lot of diversity with this one, however, I'm ranking this so much higher compared to the NARS palette that I did discuss that doesn't have a lot of like variety because of the tones in it. But when you compare the price differences, the NARS is a high-end palette that costs a high-end price. This is a drugstore palette and you can get very beautiful looks that the eyeshadow looks look that like they were done with a more expensive palette. The only thing that I'm not such a big fan of are the cream shades, the two cream shades that are they on that? Yeah, they're on here. Especially someone who has a greasy eyelids. I can only use those as and I did discuss this when I was reviewing this, that I would recommend using the cream shades as base shades. Don't try to combine them together, because otherwise you're gonna have your whole eyeshadow look like disappearing in no time. But as base shades, when you layer them under a matte shade, they kind of work out quite well. But I would really wish that they would just ditch out the cream shades and have one more shimmer and one more matte, especially if it's in this kind of formula. So yeah, if you've been eyeing this one on the drugstore, I would 100% recommend getting it. It is I think truly one of the spectacular eyeshadow palettes at a drugstore price that I've been tried in a long time. So we're getting to the top 6, and on 6th place we are having actually the Blend Bunny Sickly Sweet palette. This was launched last year, but I got this as a Christmas present at the end of last year, but I didn't get to try it out until this year. So this is basically the sort of pastel palette that they launch. I'm gonna hold this so the mirror doesn't blind you. And this is, again, Blend Bunny knows how to do these well. These are pastel formulas that actually show up on your lid. You don't have to build them. I appreciate, especially with this one, is that because there's deeper shades in this one, you can use this as a standalone palette. I do think when comparing this and the Longing palette shimmers are better with this one. I think I discussed this also in the video that I reviewed this one, that the shimmers kind of feel that they kind of drown in the matte you're using underneath the shimmer. So I felt that a lot of the shimmers, even though they look kind of similar in the pan, when you sort of layer them over a certain matte, they just kind of end up looking like the matte shade that you're using underneath them. So they have truly improved the shimmer shades from this one. But I do think that just in terms of the fact that how well they have done this, and I will especially give credit because pastels are hard to formulate, these will show up almost immediately. You don't have to do this a lot of building, and just the way that I do think this was also fun to use. I haven't been that into colorful makeup this year. There's been a lot of more neutral palettes that have been coming into my collection, but this is one of the few colorful palettes that I still get very excited about when I look at this one, and it makes me want to dig this out and play with it. And yeah, I truly think that other brands, when they do colorful palettes, they should really look into what Blend Bunny is doing, and I do I like the cotton candy sort of theme that this also has. Then again, a brand that I am rewarding quite a lot from how well they were, the palette just surprised me in such a positive way. So on the 5th, are we on 5th? Yeah. So Betty Boop palette from Glamlite. I thought that the Chalky palette had kind of a good formula, but then I tried this one and oh boy. This looks more red than it actually is, and that's also the second reason why I'm ranking this quite high. Initially when I was thinking, I was kind of looking at the reviews of this one, I was thinking that okay, but is it just too much red eyeshadow? I can deal with the pops of reds, but if it's just pure red, that's not something that suits, at least personally, I think, me. But yeah. So, but actually you can yeah, sure, you can do the red look with this one, but you can actually get kind of also neutral looks with this one. And what especially I think was beautiful, the shimmers in this one, they are these wet looking shimmers that look very shiny and dimensional on your eyelids. There's I think one one duochrome shade over here. I think it might be, then I'll actually have to, I think it's one of the purple shades over here, so this kind of has a purple to golden shift to it. So there you aren't gonna get like any of these like super multichromes and duochromes, but I do actually know that a lot of people just like using like having basic shimmers. So I do think this is especially for people who like their more neutral looks, but you want to experiment with also color, and you're especially because Glamlite for indie brand is quite affordable, so you're looking for an indie brand to try out, but you don't want to spend like close to like 70 or 60 or maybe 100 euros, then this is a good place to start with. And I do think the shimmer formula is something that's gonna also like suit like different kind of eyelids, because I do know that not everyone is fan of indie shimmers because they can be chunky and they can emphasize texture, but you don't have that kind of issues with this one. So yeah, this was, I hope that Glamlite will stick with this formula in the future, because this is truly awesome. So for my top 4, these really came down to preferences. So all the palettes in top 4 I have, well maybe with one of them I do have maybe a formula complete, but we'll come to that. But with top 4, these top 4 palettes I truly like went that, okay, but what is just that I prefer? So on the number 4 place we have the Ensley Rain, and this was the Harvest Moon palette. Again, a palette that was launched last year, but I actually didn't get to try this until this year. So this is the palette that we're looking. Actually, can I bend this? I think I can. Yeah. So this is the palette that we're looking. It's a very grungy, deep color story, and that is why it is not why it's ranking 4th and not higher compared to the other palettes. I do adore the shimmers in this one. I do like how this has a ratio. There's deeper shimmers, there's mid-tone shimmers, there's lighter shimmers. The other reason aside from the color story why this is 4th and not any higher is that the mattes in this one, the matte formula is very beautiful, but they kind of are very like all these sort of like one-tone mattes. So in terms of mattes, I would have rather wished there would have been a bit more tone variety of having a couple of lighter ones and a couple of deeper ones, and then some mid-tone ones. But this is a truly, especially for all time, a palette that I do like to dig out and use, because this sort of has this sort of, especially this sort of fall fitting shimmers, and altogether I do think that you have to consider that Ensley Rain is a very expensive brand, so I always recommend with them picking out the color stories that you truly like and maybe don't go buying all of them. But also something I will give credit to this one, even though this kind of looks that it has maybe some chunkier shimmers, but even the chunky looking shimmers, those smooth out the lids very beautifully, and I didn't have any longevity issues with this one. Then on place number 3, I would have ranked this higher, but with this one I will give the disclaimer that the matte formula in this one did drop it out from place number 2. So this is the Unity palette from Adept, so this was their sort of, I think this was their one of their fall launches this year. And I like this is a very comfort color story for me, and it's surprising me how much I actually did end up liking this when I actually got this and started trying this out. You only get like one true multichrome shimmer, which is the yellow shade in the middle. However, I'm not upset about it, because actually I think the shimmers are beautiful. I do like this that because Adept has been known for putting in some of their older palettes some chunkier shimmers, and not all of them haven't even been my favorite. But all of these shimmers are very smooth and beautiful on the lids. You can actually use brushes to them also, which is a bit rare for indie shimmers. And they just look very beautiful and sparkly, and I was very like happy with the looks that I got with this one. I felt like there were some pinks and then were some neutral leaning and just all together, and you could kind of like get a bit more green look with this one and then a bit more neutral look and pink look. The only thing that did deduct some point from this one was the fact that the mattes, like these were better mattes than the mattes on the Samarian Sunset palette. The Samarian Sunset palette, the true failure of that palette were the matte quality that was just awful. The mattes in this one have been improved, but they could still be improved a bit more. I still had maybe, when I was using them I was thinking that, okay, yeah, these are like good and better than the ones that I tried before, but we could still maybe do a bit more work with them to get them to work a bit better. But altogether, a very beautiful shimmer palette, and I would recommend this one if you especially like the shimmers that are in this one. I can appreciate because this doesn't have, because some Adept palette have a lot of multichromes in them, which has also amped up the price, but this is a very reasonably priced palette compared to some of their other shimmer palettes, so that is why I would also maybe that if you've been eyeing the brand, then maybe start out with this one. Then on place number 2, and this is the most highest ranking high-end palette, and this was I think why the ranking of this one shows maybe a bit also with the color preferences I've been going this year. So I'm ranking the ABH Spice palette on the place number 2, and again I'm gonna be showing this maybe a bit closer because it is one of the smaller palettes. So this is ranking where it is ranking because I do think that ABH has done something with their formula. This was something that even though it's a neutral palette, I was very like somehow happy to work with this one because it seemed that compared to the Fall Romance, which is the latest palette I tried before this one, they had like done something to match that they are so smooth and easy and buttery to work with. The shimmers in this one were kind of surprising because the shimmers kind of looked that okay, there's a more pink shimmer, then you have the basically like one golden shimmer and the brown shimmer, but actually also the shimmers, they kind of were a bit different on the eye than they looked on the pan, and I altogether like think that this is a very like, I hope that this is the kind of formula that ABH will stick with their future palettes, and maybe we could get then maybe a bigger palette with this formula in the future. Did you get a lot of different kind of looks with this one? No, but I do still think that I was still like positively surprised that even for a brown neutral palette, I still was able to get kind of something different, and that I think goes to the, again, they have chosen like this, the 3 shimmers in the middle, that they kind of, again, look maybe different on the pan than when you get them to your eyes. Only thing I would say with this one, don't travel with this one. The shimmers are these sort of very soft pressed shimmers, which means that they are very easy to work with, but on the other hand, that means that I think this is going to be one of those palettes that if you drop this down in any kind of way, the shimmers are going to be shattered in the first like go. But yeah, a beautiful palette, beautiful formula, and as someone with a big collection, I can also appreciate this 9-pan, even though I would kind of wish that I could have like gotten a big palette with this kind of formula. I would have been very happy with, but with the 9-pan also kind of happy with because I have a lot of eyeshadow palettes. But yeah, very, very positively surprised with this one. And then to the number 1 palette of the year, and if you saw my mid-year ranking, you are gonna probably kind of know what I'm gonna be saying. So, ta-da! So the Ensley Raincoat Moon palette, nothing topped this, and I did discuss at some point this year that the Blend Bunny Longing palette was the only thing that I thought that could have maybe topped this, but actually at the end of the day, this is why you have to try out the eyeshadow, how it actually looks and how you like using the eyeshadow, because that kind of tells much more than swatches and how things look on the pan. So I have been like singing my praises of this one so many times during this year. You probably are going to be tired about this one, but this just makes me so happy. This is like has everything. It has the sort of cool tone, you have some also warmth in this one, it has pinks, there are some different kind of also like silver and lilac leaning tones in this one, and it's just very like, every time I make a look with this one, it's always comes out very pretty, and just the quality, and especially like what they improved with this one compared to the Harvest Moon palette was that we finally got a even ratio of matte and shimmers. They have now done this also with the palettes that have launched after this one, but this was like the first palette where they finally had 50-50 ratio, and this had enough of variety with the mattes where you had lighter mattes, you had mid-tone mattes, you had deeper mattes, so you had everything. And also with the shimmers there was like enough, again you had the more lighter shimmers, then you had maybe a bit more deeper shimmers, and you had sort of like holochromes also in this one. And this was a very expensive palette to try, but this is one of the few palettes where I say that the price was truly worth it. I'm very happy with the money that I spent for this one, and this is one of the palettes that if this would suddenly break or disappear, I would like rebuy this on a heartbeat. They are currently coming out with 2 sort of little sister palettes for this one, so they have teased it. I believe those can be called Wolf Moon and Snow Moon palette. I'm gonna be interested to see when they reveal the color story of those that are there, like is it gonna get me to make me wanna get those. I would be curious to try out some of the smaller palettes from the brand, so we shall see. But so far I think this was the best of the best that 2024 was able to bring, at least for me in terms of eyeshadow of this year. And yeah, I do have to say also that I think this kind of in a nice way combines the fact that yes, I've been leaning into more neutral eyeshadow, but aside from neutrals, this also has some of the more muted colorful shades. So I do have the like option to go to the more like colorful direction, and then if I want to be more in my neutral direction, then I also have that in this one. But yeah, truly I think spectacular palette and worth every euro. So that was it. All the eyeshadow palettes that got to stay in my collection have now been ranked, and those were the ones that I tried during this year. I would very much like to know that if you have been doing any eyeshadow palette ranking, what were your maybe top 3 palettes that you have tried out during this year. I do think this might also be the last video that I'm going to be posting during this year. I think the next videos that are going to be going out, I will be able to film them during this year, but they're most likely going to be posted after the New Year's time. But if you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to the channel, or ring the bell button if you want to get notifications from my future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope I'll see you soon on a video. Bye bye!